really excited for today. I think it's a very, very interesting topic that both Andrew Jeffrey and Tony Cotton are going to go through, and we'll introduce them a bit later on. Just to let you know, we will start the session at 2, but just, please do tell us if you attended yesterday, where you're joining us from, what time of day it is with you, and just more importantly, just pop something in the chat so I know you can hear us all. Thank you very much. And it's 2 o'clock on a bit of an overcast day here in the UK for me.
Oh, it's sunny. It's sunny in Yorkshire.
Oh, okay.
But it's bright. Is it sunny and bright in Andrew?
I'm not saying anything.
Good morning.
Yes.
From Barbados. I bet it's sunnier in Barbados than it is in the north of England.
It's probably warmer, even though it's 9 a.m. Abigail.
Yeah.
You are probably warmer than I've got a jumper on. I won't lie.
Hi, Cynthia. I hope you found yesterday useful.
Overcast, but warm. I'm just going to shut my office door.
Somebody asked me yesterday, they said they couldn't attend one of the sessions this week, and they wanted to know if we would send out links. And at the end of this 4-day event, we will send out all the links and a summary of the whole program. So if you can't join us, don't worry, you will get the links to watch again.
Thanks, Abigail. It's always nice to see people coming back again. Chris in Bangkok is joining us again. Or maybe hoping it'll get better, Chris. Maybe you're just thinking, surely today will be better. No, I really enjoyed yesterday. We were just saying we think that the spread of countries was from Chile in the west. Chile is further west than Peru. Depends.
I was just wondering.
And to Thailand in the east. I'm not sure we got much further east than Thailand, but that's a really good spread of countries. And about 170, did you say, Amanda?
Yes, that's right. 170 people.
Fantastic.
That's good. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Oh, well, Abigail, the good news is it's all downhill from here. We started with the best one. Sorry about that.
That's a good idea, Abigail. I'll put something together. Let me put my email in the chat. And if you email me, I'll send you it rather than trying to do it now. I'm going to go back to that today because I think it's relevant to what we're talking about today as well. So one of the things we created yesterday, Andrew, we've got people to think about somebody that they know who's confident at mathematics and the kind of skills and attributes that they have, and made a list of that and then thought about how we might teach for that. Because in a way, if you think of a person in the real world that's good at maths, you're thinking about maths in the real world.
Yeah.
Hi, Shona. Were you here yesterday? I remember somebody joining from Nevis yesterday. And whereabouts are you, Cheryl? Those of you that were in the session yesterday may have noticed that I cleared my shed a little bit. So there's less clutter behind my head than there was yesterday. I said we're having some building done, but I realised maybe I ought to clear out my workspace a little bit. So, yeah, I got rid of a load of rubbish yesterday, which is good.
I'm looking awkwardly around at my shed now, thinking, thank goodness there's camera space in this way and any other angle.
Yeah, so Andrew and I are both speaking to you from sheds in our gardens.
Yeah. Not the same shed.
No, different sheds in different parts of the country. Hi, Terry.
I think that the arm lights here. Hang on.
Hello to everyone who's just joining us. Just to say we will start on the hour, but just do pop in the chat where you are, what time of day it is, and whether you joined yesterday. and then we'll hand over to Tony and Andrew to run this session that I am really looking forward to. Pictures of your gardens.
I'm on a big screen that doesn't turn round easily. Otherwise I would do. Not on...
All right, you asked for it. There we go. Come on. Oh, I don't know. I daren't go any further. All the cables will come out. That's as much as you get. and you can see the clutter, the hidden clutter as well. There we go.
Hi, Amy and Aman. Are you in Muscat, Amy?
What's that?
Nice place, Muscat. Have you ever been to Muscat, Andrew?
I have. Yeah. With Amanda, I believe.
Yes.
Was that right? Yeah.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. We spent a romantic couple of weeks. No, we didn't. I'm joking.
We spent one very rushed night.
It was. Well, let's not go there. It was. Yeah. It was a
doing a Max Maths
tour.
Webinar.
Yeah. It was. It was a webinar. It was very well. Very good trip. Very memorable. We did like 3 countries in 3 days, didn't we, or something mad?
Yeah.
Talking to teams from all over the Gulf. Brilliant fun. Brilliant fun. I kind of miss that now. It's tiring, but I kind of miss that.
Great. We did Dubai, Qatar, Oman, Sharjah, and I ended up in Saudi Arabia for a week, which was interesting.
Yeah.
High order in Jamaica. Hopefully, Hurricane Ian passed Jamaica and hopefully didn't do too much damage. And hi, Lisa in Belize. Well, I've now had dates to come to Belize, Lisa. 20th to the 27th of November. I will be visiting Belize for the first time. Very, very excited.
Ooh.
I know.
Are you working, Ted?
Mm.
You working?
I am working, yeah.
Very good. With teachers or kids?
Teachers, yeah.
Nice one. Nice one.
And thanks, Abigail. Your email's just come through, so I'll sort that out at the end of the session. Yeah, I hope so too. What age group do you teach, Lisa? Hi, Sana in Istanbul.
Hello, Sana. Did you watch the cricket last night, Sana? Was it the night before? Fantastic game, England and Pakistan, and everyone down there. Oh, Ukraine! Hi.
Sorry, were you yesterday? I noticed there were I think at least 2 or 3 people from Ukraine.
Well, it's great to have you with us.
This is lovely. Whereabouts in Ukraine, Victoria?
Hi from India.
Hi, Monique in Macau.
Oh, Macau. We've got slightly further east, I think. Is that the furthest east we have so far?
Yeah, Macau is further east than Thailand, isn't it?
Hi, Monique. You're winning in the Who's the Furthest East Pointless Prize competition. Jamaica, another Caribbean. I'm very jealous. Almost everyone, with the possible exception of Tony, is in a more exciting place than me.
I am in a more exciting.
Trinidad. I rest my case. Hello, everyone.
Hi, Sarah in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. It's lovely to see where you're from. I think one of the nicest things about these webinars is having people from across the whole world participate. We'd never get that in a face-to-face. Good fun as those events are. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome, Andrew, Jeffrey, and Tony Cotton. They are going to run through what I've already seen the slides, an amazing and insightful presentation for you on how to make your classrooms inclusive. Please do use the chat as we go through. I know they both like to take questions and do get involved with the sessions. There will be a certificate, a copy of the slides, and an opportunity to hear this again sent to you following this presentation. Thanks very much.
And welcome. Unfortunately, my Cyrillic isn't up to being able to pronounce whoever has just joined from the south of Russia.
Hi.
Opara? I don't know. That's probably nothing. I was in Macedonia once. What's it called now? North Macedonia. It's the Federal Republic of Macedonia then. and I managed to learn some Cyrillic because it is a phonetic alphabet, but what you have to do is remember what the letters are, and I've forgotten. So it's lovely to see so many people. Lovely that some of you have joined again from yesterday. Just to recap, yesterday we looked at real world mathematics in all its possible senses. Today we're thinking about making the classroom inclusive. Tomorrow is... What's tomorrow, Andrew?
Tomorrow is Wednesday.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
There you go. I'm always a fountain of important information. There you go.
Tomorrow is well-being.
I can find out.
Tomorrow is well-being.
Well-being.
So tomorrow is thinking about how mathematics teaching and mathematics in itself can work for both teachers and students' well-being. And that's me. And then on Thursday, Andrew's back with Charlotte. And what are you doing on Thursday, Andrew?
Oh, we're doing storytelling. How to ingratiate another word. How to use storytelling to help children make sense of mathematics. That's going to be a really great session. Yeah,
I think that'll be fantastic. And then the whole week. Well, I was saying to my wife yesterday when we finished, 4 1-hour sessions on maths is actually quite a nice little lump of training in lots of ways, and particularly being able to go back to the presentations, and maybe there'll be things that you can use with other staff that you work with and in your school, because the main reason we do these things is to have some sort of an impact on practice, and it's a real treat for us to be able to do that. So already 100 people attending from many different countries, so it's a bit daunting in some ways, but also a real honor. Hi from the Katura and the Virgin.
Yeah.
Oh, should we kick off? You start, Andrew, because I've been wittering already. So you introduce.
Okay, let's get past this slide as quickly as possible. Certainly. I'll start with a little observation. How lovely it is that today, I don't know where else in the world we'd be welcoming someone from Ukraine and someone from Russia, and in a friendly way, and all in the same group. You know, this is so lovely. And one of the things I love about education is how it brings people together. How wherever we are in the world, we all want the same things, which is the very best outcomes for children, right? Well, you can see there's a picture of Tony with a fantastic outcome from one of his children by the look of it. So which I'll let him talk about. But I've been a teacher for more years than I care to admit. Every now and then I start to think I'm getting the hang of it, and then I read something else, or I hear a child say something else, and it makes me go, oh goodness me, I know nothing. The beginning of expertise is the acknowledgement of ignorance. I think I wish I'd written that instead of said it, but hopefully this is being recorded. So I am delighted. I've worked with Macmillan before. I've worked with Ant before, and what a lovely comment I've just read there. The teachers are beyond politics. Amen. Absolutely right. Let's stick with that, and that's actually bang on our theme for today. So let's dive in. Tony, I couldn't help noticing that picture of you looking happy. There's someone else in the photo, and I'm pretty sure I know which one's you, but you've got to tell us about the other one. You can't leave it hanging.
And that's also in Brighton. So Andrew lives in Brighton, which is on the south coast of England, and I live in a place called Otley, which is just north of Leeds, which is the northern end of England. But my youngest son lives in Brighton, and that's his young son Wilf, who is now 6 months old. I think there is just about 3 weeks old when we first went down to say hello, and it's kind of relevant to what we're talking about, because we're talking about inclusion. I think what we're talking about is how diversity brings strength and interest of education, and this group of 108 people is a model for that. That there are 108 people from all around the world with a shared agenda, which is making things better for kids through education. I was going to say in school, but not necessarily just in school, but through education. And I was talking to a friend of mine this morning who works in the coffee shop just the other side of our house, And last week in a webinar, I was speaking to people in Iran and Iraq and Afghanistan. And today we're speaking to people from all around, but including Ukraine and Russia. And I said, it just reminds you that everybody is people. We're all just us. We're all just us sitting in a little shed or a room or a classroom, interested in teaching and interested in young people learning and how to do the best from that. And if only other people were as beyond politics as maybe teachers are. The other reason that I put Wilf up there is we're talking about inclusion, and I'm autistic, so I kind of do have a vested interest in this idea of inclusion. And maybe part of the vested interest is that there is evidence that autism is genetic. And if I look at my dad and some of the ways that he operates in the world, and then think about me, and also think about my childhood and how certainly at home I wasn't seen as strange, whereas at school I might have been seen as a bit strange. And I think I wasn't strange at home because I was their first child and I was a bit like my dad. So why would I be anything other than the way I was? And of course, there are, Wilf, you may be sitting looking at a little autistic baby there. Certainly not a problem. But hopefully things will be developing so that whatever Wilf ends up doing, he'll be a valued member of the school community, and maybe will enjoy school a fair amount more than I enjoyed school. Let me just give you two examples from me at school, and then maybe Andrew can talk a little bit about you at school, because we had this conversation before.
Yep.
I went to school, so I started school in the mid-60s. I'm quite an old man, and all hadn't been invented then, so there was no or it certainly wasn't something that was looked for in school. I read very early, so I could read before I went to school. And I've got a clear memory, probably aged 5, of going up to my teacher to change my reading book. So the way that reading was taught in, I was going to say in English schools then, it's still taught in many English schools in the same way, was that the reading books were all graded and you had to work your way through the books in a very particular order. And the way this reading program was graded, it was about pirates, and it was the red pirate, then the blue pirate, then the purple pirate, then the green pirate, and you had to read them in that order. Now I could read all of them, but I still had to read through them in a particular order. So I did, because that was kind of the school rules. And once I understand the rules, I'm not too bad at following the rules, as long as they're sensible. But one day I went to teacher, and I'd read the blue pirate book and I needed the green pirate next. And the teacher said, oh, the green pirate's not, somebody else is reading the green pirate, you'll just have to wait. And I said, well, why don't I read the purple pirate and then come back to the green pirate? And she said, you can't, because that's not the order they go in. So I used to quite often have arguments with my teachers. So we had an argument about it. And the result of the argument was that I got sent out of the classroom to the school library, where, of course, I then had the choice of what I could possibly want to read. So I'd been given a way of accessing the books, which wasn't maybe the best move in the teacher's armory. And I could go through a kind of whole series of those sorts of, I was going to say misunderstandings, but in a way, it wasn't a misunderstanding. I had a clear understanding of the way things worked, but in some senses, I thought that's not quite right. And so I would challenge it, and that can lead to trouble. And I think that's kind of happened throughout both my career and my learning. And you just kind of wish that a teacher had taken time to get to know you a little bit and hadn't tried to fit you into a model that everybody else had to follow. And that's kind of what I want for Wilf. Wilf's dad, I remember having a conversation with his mum, and he'd been sent out of a school assembly aged 10 because the head of his school had said, does anybody know what eccentric means? And Sam put his hand up and he said, yes, eccentric, it's a form of gear where the axle doesn't go through the center, so it doesn't wind round regularly. The rotation isn't regular. And the head said, no, it's not. I know I'm giving you very particular English examples, but that it is. And the head was obviously wanting a specific answer, was about eccentric people. So Sam, whether he's like his dad because he'd lived with his dad for a long time, or whether he's got similar sort of brain function to me, carried on the argument, ended up being sent out and ended up being sent home. But again, it's that kind of misunderstanding of what somebody is trying to say. And I think maybe an imposition of power on people who are a little bit different. And I think we're going to try and unpick that a little bit as to what teachers can do to be more inclusive rather than those examples of absolute exclusivity. Did you want to talk a bit about maybe your school experience, Andrew?
Yes, thanks. That was quite a powerful story, actually. I'll just talk very briefly about, in general terms, and I'll keep my powder dry for a little bit later. But basically, I spent my whole career in school, and actually probably most of the next 40 years, believing that I was pretty stupid, pretty lazy, pretty forgetful, pretty naughty. And it was only about 2 years ago that I realized how different, how wrong I was. And, actually, it's something very different. But all I'll say at this point is, because I didn't fit what the expectations of the school were, that seemed to be my problem, not theirs. And I want us to kind of, if you can just kind of keep that in the back of your mind until we get later on to specific issues, and then I'll say a bit more. I'm not deliberately trying to be, to hide stuff. I think there's a moment I want to share something with you, which probably anyone who's spoken to me for more than 5 minutes will have guessed already. But let's move on. Shall I put the next slide up, Ted?
Yeah. So just very quickly, that's kind of going to be the structure of the session. So we're going to start off thinking about the kind of terminology, I suppose, around special needs, and introducing somebody called Marisa McKeith, who is a colleague and friend, and has also written for a journal called Mathematics Teaching, which I currently edit, and Andrew has written for. Then we're going to talk about what inclusion might mean by inclusion, and a model that I've only recently come across, which I found quite useful. Then thinking about specifics about how we can, this thing called, in the UK, it's called making reasonable adjustments. There's actually, in law, we have to make reasonable adjustments for people with what are termed disabilities, and then a conclusion. Well, let's start with an activity, and you know, those of you who were here yesterday, those of you who have been in previous webinars know that we do like to do some mathematics. So there's a piece of mathematics just to start off with. We'll spend 5 minutes or so working on that. So there's a number grid for you. The 3 dots signify that the rows and columns extend as far as you want in both directions, and that there's five questions there. So I just want you to be jotting in the chat anything you notice about the patterns that are appearing. Then maybe think, okay, but thinking about those patterns, do I think 1,000 will appear? If I do think 1,000 will appear, how many times might it appear? And then I wonder where it might be. So just spend some time jotting on some pieces of paper and thinking about that. Downwards is doubling. Thanks, Sarah. So people seeing doubles going downwards. What other things can people see? Hi, Esther and Kata. What sort of multiples, Paola, can you see? Hi, Charlene. No worry. You've just joined us at an exciting bit. We're doing some mathematics, so have a go at that grid. I know that Andrew's thinking about 1,000. He said, I'm not going to think about that. Sumi can see multiplication tables skipping the 3rd multiple. Forward additions. 2nd row increases by 4. So it's an arithmetic progression. What sorts of sequences, Sana? And Sarah, will that always be prime numbers? The first row, will they always be prime numbers? Katura says the first row are odd numbers. Hi, Khaled in Saudi Arabia. Whereabouts in Saudi Arabia are there? So Shona has a conjecture that 1,000 will appear. I think she's thinking along 2, 4, and 8. Maybe start to expand. Hi, Khaled in Jeddah. And the third row increases by 8. So we've seen the doubles there as well, Katura. Fourth by 16. So we can think about what will the fifth row increase by? We can start to develop the fifth row. Paula doesn't think 1,000 will appear. Shona does. So there could be an interesting conversation to be had there. Fifth row begins with 16, and what does it go up in, Katura? What's the we call it the common difference? 32, because it's doubled. Arshia doesn't think 1,000 will appear. Are you working on 1,000, Andrew? You've muted yourself, Andrew, while you work.
Yeah, sorry, I did mute myself. I think 1,000 will appear, but not for quite a long time.
So give your reasoning.
Okay, I think it will appear if I extend the top row to the right. It's because it's every odd number. Eventually, the number 125 will appear. Not for a while, obviously, but it will because it's an odd number. I know it's an odd number because I'm using my number facts. Now, below 125, the rule is it doubles each time. So that's 250. Below that is 500. And below that is 1,000. So it will appear in the fourth row, but not for a while. So that's my reasoning.
Well, that sounds reasonable to me. Does that sound reasonable to everybody else? And I've seen other people think about halving, because if you double, of course, if you double one way, you halve in the other way. Oh, you've got lots of yeses.
Oh, they're just being polite. Am I through to the next round? Have I got 4 yeses?
Yes. So what has that got to do with inclusion? I'll tell a different story, and then we'll come back to this grid. So my wife's a drama teacher, and we run quite a lot of maths and drama workshops. But if you were to talk to my wife about the makeup of an ideal classroom, she would say that what she wants is a classroom made up of people who think about things in all kinds of different ways, who have all kinds of different experiences, who have many different ways of interpreting things, because that will lead to better drama. Because what she's about is about representing things about human experience. And I, as a maths teacher, thought, isn't that interesting? Because occasionally in classrooms that I visit, people seem to want a classroom which is made up of people who all think in the same way, and that they maybe wouldn't have to differentiate work for, because they would know what the response might be. For Helen in a drama class, it's what she wants is really not to know what the response might be, because that would be interesting. Sometimes in maths classrooms, it feels a little bit like we want to predict what the response will be when we ask a question, because we've already got the next question planned. And if the response is different, it kind of throws our planning. This isn't that kind of an activity. So I've used this activity with children aged 6 and 7. I've used this activity with children aged 11, 14, 18, I've used the activity with students on maths degrees, and I've used this activity with teachers. And it's always a fruitful activity. And it's even a fruitful activity when we have a huge mixed group, because people can find different things and talk about different things and go off in different directions. So some children start going off on looking at odds and evens because they notice all of the odds. Somebody might, so look, if I flick back to see who talked about prime numbers, something that I've not thought of doing with it is by extending it. And I wonder where the prime numbers are, Sarah. So the first prime number is 2, so that's in the second row. Then 3, 5, 7 are in the first row. 11 will be in the first row. So the rest of the prime numbers are all going to be in the first row because they're all odd numbers. And I'm only starting to discover this now because of what you said. And then we could think about how spaced out they are, and then what comes underneath them. So there's any number of investigations that can come out of that sort of a grid. So with students on mathematics degrees, they were creating expressions for arithmetic progressions, and they were working algebraically on it. So it's inclusive, because there's many ways in. It can engage people's interest. And when I've used it, I've quite often had teachers say to me, some of those students that work really hard on that don't normally join in or don't normally talk about their mathematics, or there was this thing about don't normally. It felt like they had access to this. So the classroom became inclusive through the activity. That's Marisa. That's Marisa McKeith. Marisa talks through facilitated communication. So that board that you can see on her knees, she's in a wheelchair. She can't get out of that wheelchair unless she's lifted out of that wheelchair. Although you can see she can manoeuvre it. There's a lever. She's quite skilled at manoeuvring it. And that's like a keyboard on a piece of paper. And she communicates by, you hold her wrist, because she shakes quite a lot. She can't actually move her hands without support, but you can sense where her hand's going, and she'll touch the letters, and that's how she communicates. And she's got a device which turns what she says in terms of touching the letters into speech. And of course that slows everything down, but Marisa will say that is one of the strengths of having her in the classroom. That what we do is we immediately have to slow down and think differently about things. When Marisa was at school, and this is an extreme example, but it's the whole story about not fitting in, and many of you might have similar stories. It was assumed because she couldn't communicate that she didn't think. So she spent something like the first 12 years of her life just being sat in her wheelchair in a classroom with nobody else there. She was just left to her own devices. Cut a very long story short, eventually her mother realised that she could communicate. And the first time I met Marisa, she just completed her English literature degree at Nottingham Trent University, where I was working at the time. And I've done various training with Marisa since. We do special needs training together. Here's something that she wrote in an article called Breaking the Cycle of Isolation and Ignorance. And that's her isolation and ignorance of people who don't really understand how she might operate in the world. But I also see those words as the other way around, that in some senses, if we don't permit ourselves to be part of diverse groups, we are isolating ourselves. Angela and I are so much less isolated for sitting in a room with 150 people from all around the world. Doesn't that reduce isolation? It might feel that I'm isolated in my shed, but I'm not. So let me just read what Marisa says. Some of us have physical needs we cannot meet by ourselves, such as eating, getting dressed, or communicating. Others of us have additional needs for help with vision or hearing, and many of us have ways of learning that are not always understood. All of these needs could be catered for in ordinary life. They're ordinary needs in the spectrum of diversity. So what Marisa is very keen to do, and the first time I read that, it's one of those times when a switch clicks. It's like, in a way, by terming things special needs, we shunt them to one side. Of course, it's an ordinary need to eat. Why is that a special need? Marisa needs help eating, but that's a very, very ordinary need. And being able to learn is a very ordinary need that can be met in ordinary life. And language is interesting. And what's also interesting is thinking about how language might work in all of the languages that you all speak. I worked in Leicester for a long time, and I worked with lots of people whose parents were from the Indian subcontinent. And I remember when we would be having conversations, say, about special needs, or they might be using Punjabi or Hindi, and then suddenly the word dyslexia would pop out, or disability, because they said, oh, there's not a word for that in Punjabi at this time. So that's a lot of this language is developing as we speak. And sometimes we kind of worry about getting things wrong, and we shouldn't. We just need to learn about each other, don't we? One little story, and then we'll go back to Andrew. I was sitting. It's about language. I was sitting in an audience for an orchestra. My middle daughter-in-law plays violin in the Stroud Symphony Orchestra, and we were at one of their concerts. And I was sitting upstairs, and as they started to play their first piece, which was by a local composer, they'd said, I was aware of somebody articulating, making noises behind me, and that was leading to a certain uncomfortableness with people. I was less uncomfortable, maybe because I was used to working with Marisa, and Marisa can articulate noises that aren't. It's not always clear what she's trying to say. It just usually means that she's excited about or interested in something. The piece carried on. People got more or less embarrassed by the chap at the back, and at the end of the piece, there was applause because it was a beautiful piece. And the conductor turned around and said, "I'd like the composer to stand up, please." And the chap behind us who'd been grunting stood up and took a bow. He was the composer. And people were using terms, and I think probably in the program it used the term that somebody with learning difficulties who'd written the piece. And I just thought that's interesting. If we're thinking about composing pieces of classical music, I think probably I've got more of a learning difficulty than he has. But we don't really have the language to talk about. Autism is often regarded as or described as a disorder. And it kind of annoys me a bit because I don't feel like I'm disordered. In fact, I think on the whole, I'm probably more ordered than a lot of people I know who haven't got this disorder. But we just have, that's kind of the way that language has developed. And the only way we can change that is by having conversations with each other. Okay, Andrew, you're...
Yeah, that's really moving, actually. And I remember you told me that story last week. So just to add to that, I spent my life believing I had very significant learning difficulties. And it turned out that what I had was an issue with memory. And so I had no option but to understand because I couldn't remember. Yeah. So I'll give you an example. That I wouldn't ever remember that 3 7s and 7 7s was equal to 70, 21 plus 49 was equal to 70. But if I understood that what that was an example of was the more general principle that 3 of anything in the universe plus 7 of the same thing is worth 10 of them, then I won't forget that because I've understood it. But having to mask in school for children who do have issues or problems or perfectly normal, as Tony said, difficulties, that masking is exhausting and often can lead to behavior issues. And the problem is, I can't speak for you, but the problem is I've been guilty in the past of noticing the behavior and addressing that instead of going, why is this child behaving in this way? So let's think about that as we move on. So here's a couple of activities. The one on the left, this is the kind of thing you might do. It's a pretty standard kind of idea for data handling or ratios. What is the ratio of the circumference of your head to your height? I would like to invite you all to take a moment, first of all, to think how this lesson might go, and whether you can think of any, either a specific individual, that's up to you, or a group of people who you think might struggle with this and why. Let's just have a moment, pop that in the chat, and I will see what you come up with. So there you go. Someone said it might be like a kind of 4th grade lesson. I mean, there's some good stuff in here, right? There's measurement. It's all good. There's ratios. There's, we could do lines of best fit for secondary. We could do positive correlations. What's the problem here? Who might struggle with this and why? Let's over to you. See what you've come up with in the chat there. Is there someone who you can think of, or some people who might have an issue with this task? Yeah, okay, straight away, yes. Someone who has physical challenges, someone whose body doesn't behave in what we would call normal way, horrible word. Who have difficulty moving their hands, sure, absolutely. I bet, yeah, some people struggle doing it alone, and some the exact opposite. Some people are quite anxious about working with someone else. I don't want you touching my head. I don't want you, there's all that sort of stuff. I might have to lie on the floor. I don't want to lie on the floor. Yeah, circumference. Yeah, language. Language is often a barrier to learning, actually. Having taught maths for a few years, I realized that often, an almost embarrassingly high proportion of the time, what I think the child is stuck on is not what they're stuck on. And it might very often be a piece of vocabulary. We need to be, yes, exactly that, Abigail. It might be, here's a question. This happened with a grade 4 student to me some years ago when I asked him what 1 more than 4 was. And he was becoming visibly quite upset because he thought 1 wasn't more than 4 and I was stupid. And he didn't want to be rude to the teacher. And so he was getting quite upset because I was asking, 1 more than 4 is what? And he's saying, no, 1 more than 4 is not. He genuinely didn't. And it was actually, it was solved with Numicon, for those of you wondering how to get around things like that. So yeah, eyesight, see so many people. I think there's issues around being self-conscious about it. There are other things you could measure. Student who's bullied, yes. I'm sure we all know people who are self-conscious about their height. Yeah, because they're too small, or in their mind they're too small, or in the mind of people who draw their attention to it, or they're too big, or they're too fat, or they're too thin for some kind of imaginary norm. So anything that involves anything to do with your body measuring, I'd say was a no-no. Now I say this now. I say this now. I have done all sorts of mistakes on this kind of idea because we struggle to find things for data. But that's just something to think about. So you might want to instead give children some imaginary data, some made-up data, or use something that has less emotion. Yeah, that's a good point, isn't it? If you are wearing a hijab, you might be very, quite understandably anxious about that. So yeah, things like that. That's an example of how not to be inclusive. Now the one on the right, it looks a fairly innocuous question, doesn't it? If you look at the question on the right, but this is an example of something that I think is inclusive, and it's something that I've been using really successfully for children, between 7 and 12, really, similar to Ant's opening activity. Let me explain. So I wonder if you've ever taught a lesson or been in a lesson where the teacher says, right, today, here's the date, here's what we're going to learn. We're going to learn about something called prime numbers. Who knows what prime numbers are? Now, somebody might not. But if you don't, you're on the back foot. It's like me asking you to think about something that you have no no place to hang. Yeah, you have no place to hang it. You can't. It's like saying, here, hang your coat up, but there's no hook. Yeah, you've got the coat, but there's no hook. And I think sometimes when we introduce language early in a lesson, we are disenfranchising children. So I didn't want to talk about prime numbers or square numbers particularly. I just thought, here's some tiles. And so they made them, and they would, they would draw them out round there. They would make a 1 by 12. You've probably already thought this through. A 1 by 12, 2 by 6, and a 3 by 4. And you can do that at the age of 7, right? But if I said today we're looking at factors and multiples, then that's slightly more. I don't know. I don't feel I can access that. So what happens here is it's great because they will find that there are 3 different rectangles, and they'll later come to generalize that idea as there are 3 factor pairs. If you've never tried this task, by the way, I can recommend it. It's brilliant. If you can get hold of square counters, they're not always easy to find, but it's a great thing to do. And I did it as a kind of proxy for chocolate bars, and we're going to make a chocolate factory and so on. But you see, if I gave you 1 more square tile, so now you've got 13, how many different rectangles can you make now? So I would just walk around the room if they've done all 3, and I said, well done. Now, here you go. Here's another one. Now, see, you've got more square tiles, more choice, right? More rectangles, deliberately trying to not catch them out in a nasty way, but just to show that some assumptions are lazy. So just how many different rectangles can you make with those 13 tiles? Anyone want to have a guess? I kind of already hinted at the answer. I've basically given away the the answer. Someone's typing it in. Yeah, that's it. There's only 1, right? And it's the 1 by 13. Okay, that's great. And if I gave you another tile, you'd have 14. And just to save some time, you could then design you could always make the long one, can't you? You can always make the 1 by the. In England, we have a thing called a Toblerone, which is a long, thin chocolate bar. So I call those the prime examples. You can always make those. But for 14, you could also make a 2 by 7, right? And then I'll give you another one. And with 15, you think, oh no, I can only make 1. Very common. I can still make that, the prime example, but I can't make a 2 by because that 15 doesn't divide by 2. And a lot of children will stop there and go, okay, what about 3 by, and walk away. And there's no, what you've done is you scaffolded them. You've made it inclusive by giving them something practical. And eventually they'll realize that you can do a 3 by 5. Now, can you see how much more inclusive that is than going, okay, everybody write down all the factors of 15. They need to know some language. They need to have some abstraction. There's nothing else. And then the fun bit, of course, is you give them another one, and they can make a 4 by 4, but they have a big argument about whether that is a rectangle or not. So you've got a bonus bit of learning there. Give them another one, 17, only back to the prime one. You see, the point about this is a series of lessons, by the way, but the point about this is it's a tremendous example of how many ways you can introduce an idea, but you have to introduce the concept before the language. Because if you have the language but no concept, then it doesn't mean anything. I remember my tutor once saying, I'd like you all to think about a krasnal now. And none of us knew what one was, and we couldn't do it. And he said, okay, well, think about an elephant then. And or a polar bear, even though we'd never seen one, we could, because we knew enough. And that's the point. Thanks. Oh, you're teaching prime numbers this week. Well, I recommend you start with some rectangles again. And there are some numbers where you can only make the prime rectangle. I wonder what we should call those numbers. We'll come up with a name eventually. And there are some numbers where you can make a square. Oh, what should we call those numbers? We'll think of something. So do you see how that's playing the lesson through that way? It takes no longer, actually. It feels like it does, but actually it's embedded, so it doesn't. It includes everybody. Now, if there are children for whom physical activity is a problem, then they are with a partner. Yeah. So you provide the resources for those, for everybody. You don't ever use, by the way, here's an inclusive thing, don't ever use the word need, mistake I've made. So if anyone needs to use the Cuisenaire rods, they're over there. And then they have to do this shameful walk across the classroom to get the stuff that they need. It's not a special need. So I always say, so if anyone prefers to use the equipment, then that's fine. If anyone prefers not to, that's fine too. Don't give a value judgment to resources. I think that's a useful observation. Was I going to say anything else on that one? I don't think so. No, that's it. Okay, so I'm going to hand back over to
Fantastic.
Mr. Cotton.
And it's great. I said yesterday about giving you activities that you could do hopefully in your classrooms, and Tasnem and Darcy have already got their next lesson, which is fantastic. And Katura, that's another interesting question, isn't it? Is a 1 by 13 rectangle the same as a 13 by 1 rectangle? And having that conversation with children, and by moving that, because exactly. So we can think about what's the same and what's different, which is always a useful question. And a better what's the same and what's different is a much better way of answering that question than saying yes or no, because what it does is we have a discussion about the mathematics rather than say try and guess what's in the teacher's head. We were going to do this, we'll not, because we only have an hour. Maybe it's something you can ponder on later, or maybe something that you could do with colleagues in your school. And that's imagining, okay, so let's pretend that we wanted to create an education system that wasn't inclusive. Let's pretend that we wanted to teach mathematics in a way that wasn't inclusive. What might we do? Well, we might decide that we'd have different schools for different people and nobody ever met each other. We might decide that the classroom could only speak one language and nobody else was allowed to speak another language. They just had to speak, say, English. We might decide that all the kids who'd succeeded in a previous examination would sit on one table, and kids who'd done a bit worse would sit on another table, so they could never have a conversation with these other children. And so you can kind of invent this classroom and then maybe wonder, why do some of those practices exist in the classroom? And back to Marisa, maybe it's to do with trying to control what happens in the classroom rather than seeing the classrooms based on relationships. And what Andrew was just saying was exactly that, was what we all have different needs at different times, and we can support each other with those needs. And actually, that's a part of developing relationships. Humans are social beings, not islands of ability. Now, from being lucky enough to travel around the world, I know that some classrooms in some parts of the world are much more inclusive in terms of shared endeavour than other classrooms. That if somebody succeeds in their class, everybody feels a share of that success and everybody celebrates. Whereas in some classrooms I've been in, people might be jealous of that success. And what Marisa is arguing for is an education system which allows learners to connect with each other, allows teachers to connect with their learners rather than compete. I think both of the activities that we've shared with you so far work better with cooperation. They don't work as competitive activities. They need cooperation and collaboration. Did you want to talk a little bit about that one, Andrew? I think we'll have to whiz a bit now. You're still muted.
There we go. So I was listening too intently to unmute. So, yeah, we'll go quick. So, yeah, this is for your reflection, really. Did you need some support, for something? And you'd be odd if you didn't, and can you think about what it was? Because this will help you as a teacher. If you focus on you as a learner, it will help you as a teacher. What were you learning? What was it? What was the specific thing you needed? And what helped? I will share one that with me about a year ago. My family and I decided to go down to a nearby place called Hove Lagoon, where they do lessons in water sports. And I thought it would be quite cool to have a go on one of these stand-up paddleboards, which, well, the clue's in the name, really. And I found it very difficult. And the person, my specific need was, I felt that the person who was doing the training was assuming a level of expertise that wasn't there. And so my need was, I need you to go slower. And what helped in my case actually was, as an adult, having the confidence to go, I'm so sorry, but when you say the kickboard, what do you actually mean? You know, and when you say the leeward side, can you just tell me what that means? But the thing is, the children always have the confidence to do that. And even if they do, are they punished for doing that? How many times do you hear, well, why weren't you listening? You know, and my mindset over the years has changed from why don't you get it to why didn't I explain it well enough to you or in the right way to you? So that might be something just to have a little think about. If you want to put one in the chat, put one in the chat. That'll be great. What it was, what helped, because I think thinking about what helped. If you just want to have it as a kind of personal exercise, that's absolutely fine as well, to be honest. You don't need to bare your soul. That's not what we're about. But I think if you think what you needed and when and why, it can only make you or us really more empathetic to the needs of the people we are trying to support.
Thanks, Andrew. So I think all of that little chunk has been about thinking about how what we term as special needs maybe aren't that special, maybe can be quite ordinary, because we all need support at some stage. It's maybe just more obvious for some people than others, but they're all ordinary needs because they can be met. That's an interesting question. I wish I could say your name. See, that's me having a special need for somebody to be able to translate Cyrillic for me. I think sport's quite a good example, because in some senses we can all do sport to a particular level, and in terms of Paralympics, there's now a lot of work done in seeing genuine athletes. And the way that the Paralympics meets, I suppose, a particular need of particular people, but can be athletes. I go running not every day, 4 times a week. I'm not very good and I'm not very fast, but I can follow training programs. I can see if I'm getting better or getting worse. So I can still compete, even though I'm not ever going to be the best one. I'm never going to win a race. But I kind of don't feel bad about that. Just a little moment on this idea of rightful presence. And really what rightful presence is about is that everybody has the right to be in a classroom. We all have a right to be in a classroom. And it's another paper in mathematics teaching, another article in mathematics teaching. And it's about what this idea of rightful presence might look like. So at the moment, I was talking about my experience in reading. I was being made to fit into the current structure, rather than the teacher and maybe even the students thinking about, well, how can we reorganize this system to better meet the needs of everybody? And that's what rightful presence would do. You notice what particular needs somebody might have and think, okay, so rather than making that person fit in, can I change the structure so it's actually better for everybody? Which kind of fits the second point as well. So rather than having to completely match the current curriculum assessment systems, can we work those in a slightly different way so that they're fairer? And that means that equity through maths education is immediate rather than something that's delayed. If you kind of work your way through school, or if you go through a form of special education, things might work out in the end for you. It's now, what can I do in my classroom at the moment to make the classroom more equitable? And that then is this idea of a shared struggle, shared work towards creating an inclusive classroom, which then creates a belongingness for the whole class in terms of the journey to inclusion. So the person with the need isn't a visitor and the classroom isn't their host. The person with the need isn't an outsider and everybody else is the insiders. We are one group. We are one group of human beings. We are one group of 143 people working for a shared end. And by working together, we create better ways of learning. So let's have a think about particular needs that are often labelled. We'll have to whiz through these, but the slides will all exist. And these are kind of, I suppose, the nearest we get to tips. The most important thing in all of these and everything we said is getting to know your students. So that's the first thing to put in the first slide. And we've started to talk about developing mathematics language. And I think both of those examples we used were good examples of developing mathematical language. Use bilingual posters, introduce key vocabulary in a context. That's exactly what Andrew was saying about prime numbers, rather than saying today we're going to learn about introduce a word that nobody knows. Introduce that in a context. I'm quite a fan of students producing their own dictionaries as they go through the year. So they have their own definitions that they work on. Really important that people are allowed to use whatever language they want to communicate while they're thinking. It's fascinating actually having discussions about the roots of words, what shapes are in different languages, what the names of shapes are and where they've come from. I'm sure you do already engage with local communities. Local communities can come in and work with you to share languages. And you will all be much better than me at this, learning some new languages yourself so that you can actually communicate with people. And that puts you in the position of a learner. Do you want to do this one, Andrew?
Yes, absolutely. Social, emotional, mental health needs, or just everyone.
Yes,
there is. There are two types of people in the world. There are people who say they have social, emotional, and mental health needs, and there are liars. I mean, they're basically, as Tony said earlier, this is about normalizing the fact that there is no normal. If that's not too much of a paradox. I'm quite an anxious person for reasons that will come up maybe a bit later. But what do those people need? In my school, we have a thing called therapeutic thinking. I'm not an expert in it, and I knew nothing about it before I went. But they say, who are you? Not here's the school, fit us. Who are you? What do you need to be able to engage? It's a complete mindset shift. But when you do it, it's amazing what it opens up. Don't, if you can predict, visual timetables are a lovely thing. If you use those, so children who are anxious can predict what's going to happen. If there's an adult they can go to, if there's a safe space they can go to, if they know they won't be judged, if they know they can take some time out, all of these things are so important. We could spend, a week on this, but just be aware that when we look at this slide, we're talking about everyone. However open they are or not, we are talking about everyone. So be clear, and be kind. And that is the best thing you can do to help them, I would say. I
think that's such an important line. Be clear and be kind. And we could probably just have said that at the beginning. And I'm sure you all are. But it's noticing when you're not. I'm thinking about myself now, and the reasons that you aren't, because we're all under pressure all the time. And one of the best lessons that I ever learned as a teacher, I've been teaching 3 years, and I'd had a row with a student, and went back up to the staff room and met a teacher who I was already quite suspicious of, didn't really trust. And he just said, the most important thing, though, is never apologize. And I've just learned, I will do the opposite from what you just told me. I went straight out, went to see the student. I said, I'm really sorry. What was the problem? And then we could sort it out. It quite surprised the student, because it was a sort of school where you probably weren't supposed to apologize. But actually we did that was the beginning of us sorting our relationship out. So again, just a few bullets. I said to Andrew, there's quite a nice phrase, I think, around autism, which is if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, because as in everybody, if you would say, what do Sikhs do? If you've met one Sikh, you've met one Sikh, because people operate differently. There are some similarities, but obviously don't assume everybody will behave exactly the same. Just listen and notice. These are things that help me. I have some difficulty in groups. I didn't attend a single lecture at university because I didn't want to walk into a lecture theatre because I didn't know where I'd sit or who I'd sit with. So I discovered that I could get the course book and sit in a cafeteria on my own and do the course as a kind of distance learning course. so it's thinking through maybe using the same groups for some people, maybe using pairs that work well together. Trying not to change routines. I quite like routines to stay the same. If you say you're going to do something, try and do it, because that really throws me. If somebody said, when my wife says I'm just going out to walk the dog and 2 minutes later she hasn't, I get very confused as to why she's suddenly doing something else. If you say in 10 minutes you will be reporting back, make sure in 10 minutes you do, because that can lead to anxiety. Transitions are quite difficult for me. Metaphors or lies, as I like to call them. So take things quite literally. And it's just quite an interesting way to think about language, and that can become a joke. And what's nice is the developing relationship. So I'm quite happy for people to use metaphors and then look at me and smile. And the last one, I think, there's kind of an assumption, maybe from films, that everybody who's autistic is absolutely brilliant at maths, and that's not the case.
Okay, Tony, you are the exception. You are the exception that proves the rule. I've got ADHD. No one will be surprised to know this. I didn't know I had it. I spent 40 years assuming that I was an idiot. But actually, some of these people have been diagnosed, and others have been retrospectively diagnosed by psychologists and psychiatrists. These are not stupid people. I think you can agree. Well, let's not generalize, but these are all high achieving people as well. And so I just want to dispel a couple of myths about ADHD. Firstly, it's not attention deficit. It's attention lack of control, like a hose pipe that someone lets go and flies around, or your brain is incredibly fast if you have ADHD. It's just not very good at steering. And so it's almost as though you could have so many thoughts, but someone else has the remote control. There you go. There's a metaphor. Apologies, Tony. It is an actual metaphor.
That one
works for you. Okay.
The hose pipe.
The hose pipe. It is like, but of course, you say to a child, "You're not listening." Well, I am listening. I was listening, but I got it. But now I'm onto something else, and and it's so important. So look, if your behaviour policy focuses on how children must behave, and if they don't, what happens, then what you've got is not a behavior policy, it's a punishment ladder. And that, my friends, is not acceptable, and zero tolerance. Oh my goodness. Zero tolerance is why I spent most of my life in trouble. Okay. Because I broke a school rule, not because I was naughty or bad. Now, watch out for girls. ADHD is slightly less common in girls, but there may be a sense that that's because they're better at masking. Hyperactivity can be in the brain, not just the body. Mm-hmm. If you see a child doodling and drawing, don't tell them off. That is their brain processing. Okay. If you can keep distracting noises down for them, that helps. Self-esteem, for reasons you can probably guess, like they've had a terrible time, self-esteem is very low in people with ADHD. They want to please you, but they're not that keen on themselves. So watch out for that. Don't give them lots of instructions. Praise their success, and don't assume they're naughty or not listening. That's a kind of a horrendously short whistle-stop tour through the one significant thing I do know about. It's a superpower, my friend. It's not a disability. It's a superpower. Trust me on that, but do some further reading on that one.
I'm deliberately going to skip right to the last slide, but I think that idea that the way that one's brain works is a superpower, whoever we are, rather than a disorder or a problem, is really important. And that without seeing that person as someone who enriches the classroom rather than brings problems to the classroom will give you a much better classroom. I'm still learning from having taught a little lad called Anthony, who was 11 when he joined my class with spina bifida, died when he was 14. Our classroom was such a better place for having him in it for those 4 years. Genuinely, and we learned better, and we learned new things, and we learned all sorts of different things. So I've skipped over 4 or 5 slides. They're all bullet pointed slides about particular named issues that you might see in your classroom. I think the thing that Andrew just said then, which was research, when you find somebody who brings something new to the classroom, work with them on researching what might help, and that will make your classroom a much more wonderful place to learn in than it is already. And I'll just read this last concluding paragraph from Maurice's piece. My vision is that we create a system of learning that prioritizes our relationships with each other rather than how we achieve in competition with each other. In that way, we could learn about each other's needs as ordinary needs, which we can find ways of meeting. I think that within a generation of having a learning system without competition, we could have a world where people are valued for what they can give. Those who need the most care could be seen as giving the opportunity to others to get close and understand the commonality of vulnerability. This in turn could make us feel safe about our own vulnerability. Real inclusion for me is about the promotion of peace and equality. So I think we'll leave it there. Thanks ever so much. We've run over by a minute. We apologise for that, but I've loved working with you, Andrew.
Yeah, you too. And can I say, Olga, hi. I Googled the Cyrillic while Ant was talking.
Oh,
so
Olga.
there you go. We want you to feel seen.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, both Andrew and Tony. That was so insightful as ever. And I know that everyone will look forward to reading the slides in their own time. Thank you very much for joining us. You will get a certificate as soon as this webinar ends, and the slides will come out to you. And please do join us tomorrow as well for well-being in the classroom, both for yourself and your students. Thanks very much indeed, everyone, for your time. Much appreciated.
And Antonio, recordings are available.
Yes, yeah, they will be.
How do they get them, Amanda? How do they get them?
The recordings are sent out in a link in an email that will come out tomorrow.
Fantastic.
And then if anybody can't join for all the other sessions, you will get them all sent to you at the end of the week.
And Kerrian is asking about a link for tomorrow. Where will they find that?
That will go out in the email that will follow the close of this webinar.
Fantastic.
Oh, there you go.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.